I feel like it's pretty safe to assume that most people have not had this conversation because it's tough and it's hard and it feels weird. And I could be wrong. I would hope to be wrong. I hope more people have talked about this, but I just feel like we don't talk about death enough. Yesterday was the Mass to celebrate Brent's life. For those of you that don't know, my best friend relapsed and overdosed on August 10th. He didn't have a traditional viewing or funeral, so his family did have a Catholic Mass at the church he grew up in. And it was a beautiful service, but I didn't see a lot of his friends there. And I think there's two primary reasons for that. The first one is that the Catholic Mass is very formal, and I think the formality of it all just kind of turned off people that aren't very religious or don't feel comfortable in a church. And the second reason is that his family really delayed scheduling the service, and I don't really know if that was intentional or not, if they were trying to deter unwanted friends away, or if it was just because it was hard for them. And in all honesty, I think it was the second reason. I think they really had to process things. And I mean, I don't think they truly even knew what Brent would have wanted. I do believe that he would have preferred a Mass at St. Joseph's like they did, because that's what his parents wanted, and he would have done anything to make his parents proud and happy. And I know that church is one thing that they always shared. They always had that together, and that was a staple throughout his life. But on the flip side, it didn't feel like Brent. It didn't feel like the Brent that I knew. And I didn't really feel like I had any place to say anything, but it really got me thinking. Do you know what kind of service you would prefer if you unexpectedly passed away tonight? Have you communicated that to anyone? Like your boyfriend, your husband, your wife, your family? What do you think your family would choose? What kind of service would they choose for you? Is it what you want? Before we go on, actually, I would like you to leave that in a comment for me. Answer those questions and let me know your responses because I'm curious. I feel like it's pretty safe to assume that most people have not had this conversation because it's tough and it's hard and it feels weird. And I could be wrong. I would hope to be wrong. I hope more people have talked about this, but I just feel like we don't talk about death enough. And while you're leaving a comment, subscribe to my channel. I have been contemplating death and all that is related to it lately, and I have a few interesting video ideas planned. So I would like you to come back for more of those. So definitely hit subscribe and turn the little bell notification on. I feel like we need to talk about death more because it is inevitable and society really shies away from the topic. I'm often told that I'm being morbid. Talking about death is just morbid, and by talking about death, you're wishing it or bringing it upon your door. That's so not true. Death is going to come when it comes, and by not talking about it and not having these conversations, the only thing we're truly doing is not preventing death from coming. We are actually just setting our loved ones up for failure. We are making an already very stressful event and, an already stressful life event and time in their life more difficult because they are making choices that they're just not sure about. Unless they have had this explicit conversation with you or they have some sort of documentation that you filled out previously, they are making decisions based off of how they feel, what they believe in, and what they think you would want. But no one can know what you would really want. That's why this conversation has to be had prior to death. It should be had a long time prior to death. I really just feel like talking about death constantly and open and honest communication about it makes the whole idea of it less taboo because it is truly just a part of life. Everybody is going to die. Everyone. So why are we pretending like we're not going to, or that it's not something that we have to worry about? There are genuinely so many things we have to consider when it comes to death and the burial process. Do we want to be cremated, or would we like to be buried? Do we have a burial plot paid for or picked out? Have we been doing a payment plan? Have we done any prepayments? Do we have a life insurance policy that's going to cover this? Do we want to have a natural burial or a traditional burial? And the traditional one is where you're chemically embalmed and have makeup and done all up. And the natural burial doesn't have any chemicals. You are just put in the ground and you decompose and turn back into the earth. Are you going to donate your organs? What about your body? Are you going to donate your body to science? That's definitely a thing that you could do. Do you have a trust fund or a will? Would you like your family members to be involved in the preparation of your body? because that is actually something that can happen, and it's very cathartic and healing for family members. It sounds crazy, but the more that you learn about it, the more that you understand that it really helps the grieving process. And are you planning on having a viewing or funeral, a celebration of life, or a Catholic Mass? I'm planning on going over these topics in future videos, so definitely subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. But today I would like to explore the benefits of talking about death, how it helps with the grieving process, how it improves your overall quality of life. And I strongly attest to that. Growing up, I had lost loved ones, older people. I lost my grandfather, my grandmother, and older relatives or family friends, but I never lost a sibling or a cousin or anyone that was remotely close to my age. And in October 2015, that changed. The first death was my friend Vince, and he died from a heroin overdose. And I found out at my baby shower for Emerson, and it sucked, but I had not been as close to Vince recently. He was such an amazing, vibrant person. This guy could just sit down at your piano and play the craziest jazz ensemble and sing it, and then he would write poetry, and God, he was just amazing. He had so much talent and so much potential, and his flame burned out way too soon. But the real loss happened at the end of October when Jenna passed away. I've talked about it before. Greg's sister, she wasn't even a full year younger than him. She passed away on October 19th, 2015. And that wrecked my world. It wrecked our world. And it was hard. Losing Jenna was the first time that I lost someone so important. Greg has always been a very analytical person, so we discussed this at length for many nights even. I just remember at the impact, that's what we called it. At the impact, we didn't know what to do. I remember he got the phone call in our kitchen and he put his mom on the speakerphone, which he never does, and her voice I just will never forget. And I was sitting at the desk doing some projects and working on some homework because I was about to finish my final class before giving birth to Emerson. And I just knew. You just know. And all we could do was survive. That's the best way to put it. So what worked best for us was instrumental music, and we listened to Explosions in the Sky. I listened to their entire discography on repeat for weeks, if not months. And we would color. We bought adult coloring books, and we would just sit there, so you're doing something creative, and it's fun, and it requires concentration, but it's not so consuming that you can't do it, because I could barely do anything else. I tried to go to work a few days later. I thought, after 3 or 4 days it'd be okay. My grandfather also passed away at the end of this week, so it was a bad week, and I tried to go back to work and I couldn't do it. I literally felt like time stopped for me. The world didn't stop, life didn't stop, but I stopped, and I did not know how to keep going. I didn't know how to move forward. And not a month later, I gave birth to Emerson. So it was just so eye-opening to have been given such a blessing, such a gift, the gift of life, only to know how precious and fragile it is and how terrifying it just could happen at any moment, You can never be prepared for it, and it made me so aware of that, so hyper aware of it, and it was just hard. And Greg and I talked about death a lot, openly. We talked about all angles of death. We didn't talk so much about his feelings about losing Jenna, but we talked about death. And if I would try to carry this conversation on with anybody else, it was shut down immediately. It was taboo, and I was being too morbid, and it was uncomfortable for people. They didn't want to talk about death because they didn't want to invite it upon themselves. I've heard that so much. That's just stupid, guys. Life is followed by death. That is just how it works. So I would try to have these conversations, and people would tell me I was too morbid, or that it was too uncomfortable, or that they didn't like thinking about it. And I'm sure they just assumed I was too fucked up about losing Jenna, and I was fucked up about losing her, but I was more fucked up by the fact that nobody talked about death. I was so unprepared for this moment in my life, and I really felt like I could have been more prepared. I didn't realize I was so blind and so naive prior to losing her. Even after losing Vince, even after losing my grandparents prior in my childhood, I just didn't understand the impact of life and death. And I learned a lot about death as I talked about it more, and I wasn't being morbid, I was just being human. I was evolving, I was growing and learning more. And that's normal. Too many people are stunted by their fear of death that they don't even have this conversation. And I'm talking at like just the basic level, like what you would like to happen when you die. You know, your services, your burial, that kind of stuff. I'm not even talking about like what happens after we die. Do we go to heaven? Is there life after, none of that. I'm not talking about those type of deep conversations. People can't even talk about if they want to be cremated or not, if they want a viewing or not, how they're going to pay for this stuff. It's like out of sight, out of mind. And I get it, it's easier. Ignorance is bliss. But it doesn't get you any better. It doesn't get you any further. Like, it really holds you back, and it sets your family and loved ones up for failure when you do die. So over the years, I have lost more and more friends, and it feels like it's exponentially increasing year after year. And 2018 was hard, and then 2019 happened. So, I mean, I'm more and more experienced with death, but that doesn't make it any easier. And you have friends that are in active addiction that you kind of expect it to happen. I hate to say that. I really hate to say that. But if you have a loved one in addiction, you are constantly wondering when it's going to happen. Not if it's going to happen, when. And I spent years thinking about Brent like that. When is he going to die? Is this going to be it? There were countless occasions where I literally thought he had died, and I cried up all night talking to Greg about what it meant, what was going to happen, and it would turn out he had just disappeared for a few days on a bender, and he would come home and get clean again, and life would go on. But I literally mourned his death at least 3 separate times prior to this year when he actually passed away. And like I said, for years I wondered when I was going to lose him and not if, but that changed. That had changed recently. So last July, Brent's wife, Molly, passed away from an overdose. And a few months later, his ex-girlfriend and mother to his daughter also passed away from an overdose in October. And it almost killed him. It did, and I watched it, and it hurt to watch, but he kept going. And there were so many days when he told me he didn't want to be alive. So many days, like days we would be having normal conversations, and he would seem happy and fine and be going to work and just going about his life, but tell me still that he didn't want to be alive. He wanted to die. And how do you respond to that? Because you know they mean it. I wanted to be selfish, and I mean, that's irrelevant now, honestly. We've had those conversations, and he actually reached a point maybe in like June or July of this year where he didn't want to die anymore, and he told me that, and it was such a good feeling. I felt like he had made it to the other side, It had been over a year since Molly had passed away in July, and he had a new girlfriend who's just adorable, and he was having fun, and he was happy. He had a good job. He was rebuilding his relationship with his parents and his brother, and he had a loving relationship with his daughter who he could go see, and, life was getting better, and he was looking forward to the future. When Molly passed, her family didn't have a public viewing or service at all. There was no obituary, and, it just felt like there was no closure, no place for us to go mourn together. And there were so many people that loved her. So I want to discuss this in my next video, the purpose of having this public service, who it's for, why we do it, why people don't do it sometimes. I just think it's an important conversation. Brent made such progress over that year, and seeing him on the other side felt so good. And I let my guard down, but Brent had a problem with relapsing. He used to relapse all the time because he wanted to die, because he just didn't care. He didn't care about being alive. He didn't see a point in the future. But once that mentality changed and he was happy to be alive, he still kept relapsing. Because addiction doesn't give you the luxury to just stop because you want to. You're not able to just muster up enough willpower to just stop. It doesn't work like that. His overdose was accidental and honestly completely unexpected. I wasn't ready for it. But at the same time, I was, in this weird way. I had been practicing this for years. I had spent countless nights crying and mourning his death when he wasn't dead. It still hurts. I'm still grieving. Losing him still hurts a lot. It's just different this time. And at first I thought I was jaded. I thought I'd just been exposed to death too many times, lost too many people that were important to me, closing off my heart. But that's not it at all. I am feeling so many emotions. I am so sad and so heartbroken, so devastated. Where with Jenna, I couldn't move forward. Time literally stopped. I couldn't keep up with life. Life didn't stop and the world didn't stop, but I stopped. I didn't know what to expect or what to do, and honestly, for a very long time, I tricked myself into thinking she was still alive because we existed long distance. You know, she lived in Pennsylvania while I was in South Carolina with Greg, and I just let the denial kick in. It was easier that way, you know? It was just like, oh, she's just in Pennsylvania. And then we moved to Pennsylvania, and I had to accept the fact that she's not here. She's not here. And Greg really struggled to process his emotions. You know, we discussed death at length, but his emotions, that's something different. As you may or may not know, Greg has ASPD, which is antisocial personality disorder. He also has ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder, but the ASPD was something that, you know, was more prominent in his youth and especially during his active addiction. What his ASPD did then was to kind of block out his emotions. He could block out empathy or guilt or altruism or even unconditional love. And FYI, it's not that he doesn't feel those things or can't feel those things, it's that he has the ability to choose to feel it. And he also has the ability to choose not to feel it. So drugs definitely helped numb his overall emotions and just kind of kept him staying in that cycle. But as he's gotten older, he's outgrown it, he's in recovery, so his numbing emotions, that's all gone. And losing his sister, it had such a deep emotional impact that he didn't know how to handle his emotions. So he stuffed them down like he always did, but it literally, like, it fucked him up. Like, he would, I just remember times where he would just be trying so hard to just say a sentence, just ask me a question, and all he wanted to do was tell me how he was feeling or ask me for help, and he couldn't. It was like he stumbled over the words and would just spit out syllables and get so angry, and I felt so bad, but he really didn't know how to just process his own emotions. And honestly, one night we decided to trip on acid just for fun, and it actually ended up being the one thing that helped him break through this emotional barrier. He had such an amazing experience that, I don't know, if you guys would like to hear more about that story, I would definitely be willing to share it, and I would share it with him because I was actually asleep for part of it, but I don't know, I'm very glad that happened because it really helped him open up his heart and heal his heart. So we weren't prepared for our first encounter with death and losing Jenna. And I don't think you can ever be fully prepared to lose a loved one. But I know that I am more prepared now than I ever was. And I'm not jaded. I have just learned to accept loss and death as part of life. I still experience denial and anger from time to time, and I'm just more aware of this and able to redirect my thoughts when I find that happening. I've just been able to accept death and find a way to continue carrying on. And it's not easy. Don't think that it's easy. Like, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be completely emotionally devastated about the loss of your loved one. It's okay to mourn and grieve and hurt and be angry and go through denial and just feel the range of emotions that comes with grief. The important thing is to not get hung up on that stuff. Don't get hung up on the denial and the anger. You have to work your way towards acceptance. And I just feel like we're so much more prepared to reach that stage of acceptance if we've already started the conversation about death long before you lose a loved one. Talking about death now will help you when the time comes. And it's going to be uncomfortable and weird. And it's going to hurt and feel icky. And that's normal. Go slowly. Talk about what you're okay with someone that you trust and love, and explore these thoughts. You can do it alone if you want. I do that sometimes too. And honestly, I am still very likely to trigger an existential crisis if I do it alone or if I have a conversation with Greg and I just let my thoughts go too far. And to me, that just shows that I have a lot more work to do before I'm truly not afraid of death. Because death is just a part of life. And I need to not be concerned with what happens after death. Because honestly, Keanu Reeves said it, the only thing that we know that happens after we die, those that loved us will miss us. I accept death as a part of life, and I challenge you to do the same. I challenge you to face your fear of this uncomfortable topic. I want you to be open to the idea of the uncomfortable, the unknown. And it's okay to have this conversation. It's not morbid, it's not creepy, and it's not wishing death upon you or the person you're speaking with. It's literally just talking about something that happens to everyone. And by talking about death, you are able to reach this new level of awareness and gratitude in your life. And truly, you aren't living the most fulfilling life you could be if you're not discussing death. If you're not aware of it constantly. You have to constantly be aware of the fact that this could all end at any time, right? Live each day like it's your last. And truly, I think too many people think that when they hear that, they think like, live each day with excitement and vigor and do everything that you want to do. But really, living each day like it's your last means focusing on your relationships and making sure that the ones that you love know that you love them and why you love them and what you love about them. It is so fulfilling to have that in your life. I try not to leave any encounter, like with my mom or my son, on a bad term. I want to make sure that I'm okay with that being the very last experience they might ever have with me. And if I'm not okay with it, then I make sure to fix it right away. So, I don't know. I hope that this was eye-opening. It might have been uncomfortable. If so, let me know in the comments.